it's not just the directors that are responsible for all the pretty pictures on the silver screen. There's an entirely different artist in charge of getting the right light through the right lens to make the images pop. These are our picks for the top 10 cinematographers of all time. In the beginning, there was no cinematographer. Wasn't the role, wasn't the word, wasn't the need. Lighting came in one flavor, as much as possible, and camera work involved setting, pointing, and cranking. And so, the first important cinematographers were also directors, the Lumiere brothers, George Méliès, Edwin S. Porter. But as the century turned, things began to change. Shots began to emerge. Artificial lighting was invented, and thus, the cinematographer was born. And the best were the likes of Karl Struss, Charles Roscher, George Barnes, and Ernest Palmer. However, if there's one cinematographer who looms larger than life in cinema's infancy, it's none other than Billy Bitzer.
And one day they were having lunch, and someone didn't bring an old red tablecloth, they brought a white one. And as the sun moved through the lunch above them, Griffith called to Billy Bitzer, said, "Billy, come over here. Look at this, look at their eyes, look at their faces." He said, "Why, yes, that's a reflected light." And that was the beginning of the use of reflectors.
Gottfried Wilhelm Bitzer has a mind-boggling 1,255 credits as a cinematographer, but none more important than his collaboration with D.W. Griffith, where, on films like Birth of a Nation and Intolerance, he was a part of the innovation of close-ups, fade-outs, iris-ins, diffusion, reflectors, artificial-only light, and even backlighting, foundational aesthetic elements of cinema that are still with us to this day. In Bitzer's hands, for the very first time, the camera lens and the lighting of the scene were not just functional, but expressive, making him one of the first true cinematographers. Fast forward a few decades and cinema has established itself as not only a viable art form, but a wildly lucrative venture. Business is booming, movies are being made at a record pace, studios more resemble an assembly line than a creative space. It is Hollywood's golden age. The stars nearly glisten, the lighting is soft and flattering, the sets are beautiful and well lit, cameras are lighter and have started to really move. Cinematographers like Lee Garms, Charles Lang, and especially James Wong Howe shaped the black and white films of the 20s, 30s, and early 40s. But none had quite so dramatic an effect as our number 9 pick, Gregg Toland.
He did seem to have an eye for things, and also was very creative. I mean, for instance, we much later started filming with a candlelight, for instance, or a match, and he already did it in Grapes of Wrath.
Toland's legacy is one of not just embracing technological change, but of wielding it as a weapon at the razor's edge of the Hollywood aesthetic. Cinematographer on such stunning films as Les Miserables, Wuthering Heights, and The Grapes of Wrath, Toland axed soft fill lights in favor of deep black shadows. He arranged complex frames and dramatic tableaus, and he combined brighter lights with faster film stocks to stop down his lens and trade the single, plain, shallow focus images of yesteryear for tack-sharp dioramas that extend deep into the screen. In 1941, he teamed up with an utter novice, declaring that the only way to learn anything is from somebody who doesn't know a damn thing. And together, he and Orson Welles made Citizen Kane. And while his aesthetic revolution was almost immediately rejected wholesale for its over-severity and complexity, within a decade's time, it had become the new normal. Of course, right around this time, things are about to change for cinematographers forever. Slowly, we're about to start seeing in color. Color cinematography had actually been around since the beginning of cinema itself, although it was little more than a novelty until the mid-30s development of Technicolor. And even then, the system was bulky and unpopular, despite some exceptional work by cinematographers like W. Howard Green, Ray Renahan, and Jack Cardiff. It wasn't until colors morphed from the hyper-vividness of Technicolor to the more realistic reproduction of Kodak's Eastman color in 1950 that color film would truly catch on. And it is innovating here that we find our number 8 pick, Robert Burks.
For color cinematography in New York, To Catch a Thief, Robert Burks.
Burks made perhaps the most spectacular transition to color as Alfred Hitchcock's cinematographer, and he very quickly stretched the use of hue to a wide and varied effect, capturing the claustrophobia and oppressiveness of Rear Window like a humid summer day, the feeling of a beach breeze in To Catch a Thief, the deep seduction of obsessiveness in Vertigo, and the stifling seasickness of captivity in Marnie, each making color an essential part of its composition and design. There is perhaps no cinematographer who so quickly grasped the power of cinema's new tool, which is why he's our favorite pick of this era. The next tectonic shift came in the 1960s, when Hollywood was monopoly busted out of its golden age, started competing with TVs, and introduced us to cinema screens that did this. And while we love other cinematographers of the era like Conrad L. Hall, Haskell Wexler, and Robert Surtees, we think our number 7 pick made the very best use of cinema's new shape, the one and only Freddie Young.
Well, I must say, I find dialogue a bore for the most part, and incidentally, I think people in the movie business are going to concentrate more on pictures than on dialogue, because fortunately, you boys have got to sit people down like me and have them talk and talk and talk. Well, I think we can beat you by showing pictures.
Best known for his immense collaborations with director David Lean on Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago, and Ryan's Daughter, no one has used cinema's frame quite so incredibly as Freddie Young, and the images he has created are some of the most memorable in all of film history as a master of the 70mm format in the harshest of environments. There is such a devastating sense of natural spectacle and being there in Freddie Young's imagery that it is of very little controversy that he is often and aptly referred to as the greatest cameraman of all time. Beyond the 60s, cinematography begins to take on a look that feels more and more familiar to today. Faster and faster film stocks allow for lighting styles that don't look so lit, as in the work of Nestor Almendros. The camera was freed up too, and the invention of the Steadicam allowed it to glide places it had never been before, as in the work of John Alcott. Cinematographers like Gordon Willis blazed a shadowy, top-lit path, while Vilmos Zsigmond delved into low-key and low-contrast. However, for our number 6 pick, we think there's nothing in the 70s and 80s quite like the work of one of our favorite cinematographers ever, Vittorio Storaro.
E quindi tutti gli anni 70 hanno significato questa possibile espressione, non più di timore, ma quasi di conoscenza, cioè bisogna attingersi degli stessi colori di cui si ha timore per poterne veramente affrontarli e portarli alla coscienza.
You will know Storaro's work for his overwhelming single sources that shape the tone of an entire scene, for his always smoky beams of light, and for his emblematic use of color. His best collaborations were those with Francis Ford Coppola and Bernardo Bertolucci, where he produced such films as Apocalypse Now, The Last Emperor, and The Conformist. He strikes us as the cinematographer of the era who has most clearly been inspired by those before him. The depth of Toland, the color of Burks, the frames of Young, who synthesized all their brilliance and pushed it onwards to the next generation, creating a new, modern language of images that are bold, beautiful, and full of meaning that persists to this day. So, as you can see, the history of cinematography isn't limited to America and Hollywood. The rest of the world had been making films for just as long too. In Germany, Karl Freund and Fritz Wagner took lighting and camera work to its most emotive extent with Expressionism. And in France, Henri Decay and Raoul Coutard freed up the camera in its new wave. In Italy, Otello Martelli saw their aesthetics into neorealism and back, while Tonino Delli Colli used a widescreen just as artfully as Freddie Young. However, for our number 5 pick, we're looking to Sweden for the timeless work of Sven Nykvist.
When you talk about Ingmar's genius and Ingmar's enormous importance for film, I don't think you can do that without talking about Sven Nykvist.
Sven Nykvist is a cinematography god. Best known for his work with Ingmar Bergman in the prime of both their careers, they pushed each other to new aesthetic heights. His look evolved from high-key TV-style fluff to high-contrast, moody and graphical, to soft, simple, and naturalistic. His is a lighting that is naturally sourced, that achingly reveals the truth in the eyes. Where Storaro brilliantly lit sets like no other, there is nobody who could light the face like Sven Nykvist. Light it in a million different ways, boldly or softly or harshly or sweetly or romantically or severely. One need look no further than Persona for the ultimate cinematographic statement on the human visage. Of course, Europe isn't the entire rest of the world either. Russia has treated us to the revolutionary lensing of Sergei Urusevsky and Vadim Yusov. India gave us the work of geniuses from Subrata Mitra to Santosh Savan. China has given us Gu Shangwei and Zhao Jiading, while Hong Kong's best come from the likes of Arthur Wong, Peter Pao, and Australian Christopher Doyle. South America has donated Hollywood some of its finest cinematographers like Rodrigo Prieto and Emmanuel Lubezki, and Japan shook the world in the 50s when it debuted on the grand stage with the work of Kazuo Miyagawa.
パンオがさ望遠なんだから、そうすると結局絞りを相当かけなきゃいけないわけね。で絞りをかけることによってライティングのこう情緒みたいなのちょっと壊れかけるわけで、その時に宮川さんが来たわけだよね。用心棒あれはね、絞りがかかってんだけどある艶みたいのがね やっぱり他とは全然違うね。
Much of this list has been occupied by cinematographers whose career was defined by a single directorial collaboration. But Kazuo Miyagawa's is more defined by how few Japanese directors he didn't work with at their best. Lenzing Kurosawa's revolutionary Rashomon, Ozu's poetic Floating Weeds, Mizoguchi's painterly Ugetsu, he trained first as an artist, transposing his framing aesthetic from the Japanese ink painting art of Sumi-e. His compositions are astonishing for their asymmetrical balance, his black and white work dripping with the texture and shades of all the different grays, and his camera movement is electrifying for its brushstroke-like touch. His work is inseparable from the greatest films of the Japanese Golden Age in the same way that he too is inseparable from the legacy of Japanese cinema. Back in Hollywood land, cinematography continues to charge towards the modern. The 80s and 90s see their best DPs push color even more expressively, as in Jordan Cronenweth's work on Blade Runner and Darius Kanji's work on Delicatessen and Seven. And they see Robert Richardson's immense visual zing and experimentation with Oliver Stone and then Quentin Tarantino. We love John Toll, Tak Fujimoto, and Slavomir Žižek in this era, but no one shone in the end of the last millennium more than Janusz Kaminski.
Cinematography is one of those professions that allows you to tell the world who you are. Because you're working with light, you're working with darkness, you're working with composition. And all that comes from learning, but also comes from inside. And I don't know, maybe I'm just like waxing too much, but you know, if you want to know something about me, watch my movies.
You know Janusz Kaminski's work from his decades-long relationship with Steven Spielberg, and together their images practically defined this era. His camera work is symphonic, working with Spielberg to orchestrate long-take masters that perfectly cover an entire scene. His lighting is massive, famous for throwing entire trucks worth of kit at a set to get the look right, eschewing naturalism to instead paint impressionistic interpretations of the mood. It is backlight heavy, glamorous, and it screams Hollywood in such a way that it is his touch that most of us think of when we think of blockbuster cinematography. If you've been counting, you may have noticed that there's something all our picks so far have had in common: their gender. And it's not just our picks. We have yet to so much as even mention a female cinematographer's name on this list. There is a lot of talk about a lack of female directors and screenwriters in filmmaking today, but cinematography is dramatically worse. Best cinematography remains the only Oscar category to have never even nominated a woman. The good news is that it's changing fast, and the new millennium is bringing us a new class of cinematographers of all genders. Some of our favorite female cinematographers are Mandy Walker, Charlotte Bruce Christensen, and Ellen Kuras. However, for our number 2 pick, we're most excited about the work of Maurice Alberti.
This is nothing like documentary filmmaking. Absolutely nothing.
Well, this is life, right? This is our life.
No, this is not life. This is constructed life.
The dearth of female cinematographers thus far in cinema's history does have one positive side effect. Kept on the fringes, female cinematographers have tended to develop a more independent, alternate cinema aesthetic. And Maurice Alberti is a great example of this. A French indie cinematographer with a penchant for the handheld and realism. You've seen her work in Happiness, The Wrestler, and Tape, and it draws more from the documentary and French New Wave aesthetics than that of traditional Hollywood. But her work on Creed shows us what happens when that look gets a bigger budget, and it is gorgeous. We're excited to see how it evolves as she and her contemporaries push farther into the mainstream, and we're confident that given the opportunities, she will bring us even more of the extraordinary. And finally, finishing off our cinematography tour of the ages, we come to those figures defining mainstream imagery today. The new millennium saw new technology shift the role of the DP more dramatically than it had since the introduction of color. Digital intermediates allowed for further control of the image's development in post through the use of the colorist. Digital image capture has all but rendered celluloid extinct, replacing natural grain with new color science, as pioneered in the work of Jeff Cronenweth and Steven Soderbergh. Lighting got softer, as with the work of Robert Yeoman. VFX is everywhere, as with Claudio Miranda. Cameras got smaller and even more mobile, as with Shane Hurlbut. And the resurgence of the CinemaScope aspect ratio has blown our minds in the work of Robert Elswit and Hoyt van Hoytema and Wally Pfister, and again, Emmanuel Lubezki. But no one has been on the front line of all of these revolutions while producing one of the most consistently incredible bodies of work, quite like the inimitable Roger Deakins.
He's just the coolest dude. He's like a member of the Rolling Stones. We all wish we could be him. He doesn't even give much either. You're dealing with a director who was very effusive and passionate. So Denis would be like, Roger, I love this shot, it's incredible, I love it. And Roger would be like, yeah, it's good.
Roger Deakins is the closest thing the typically arcane profession of cinematography has to a household name. And that's mostly because he seems to be medically allergic to only ordinarily beautiful shots. But he's also been on the bleeding edge of today's technological innovations, most importantly as the first cinematographer to finish the look of a film digitally in the color grade with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Deakins' widescreen frames are evocative of the stunning tableaus of Freddie Young, his bold colors of Storaro, his naturalistic lighting of Nyquist, and his patient but methodical camera movement of Toland. His style is easily the most emulated of today, which will no doubt have an immense effect on the look of the era. But most importantly, the Deke has done something that no other cinematographer on this list can claim. He has watched our movie lists. That's right, he checked out our Brilliant Moments segment about his work on No Country for Old Men and wrote that we mostly got it right, which is the only reason why we think he's one of the best cinematographers of all time. Just kidding, it's this. So what do you think? Do you disagree with any of our picks? Do we leave out any of your favorite directors of photography? Let us know in the comments below and be sure to subscribe for more Cinefix movie lists.